The media raised all kinds of questions about President Trump's first major legislative victory. Joining us now from Manchester is Corey Lewandowski, the president's first campaign manager and an informal advisor. And Corey, with President Trump able to get this health care legislation through the House with one vote to spare, it sparked a lot of media criticism about whether millions of people will lose their coverage and even whether some people will die, according to some liberal commentators. Do you think the coverage has been fair?
Well, look, Howie, we know the coverage hasn't been fair. You've got a president who, time and time again, the media has said first he wouldn't run for office, then he couldn't win the primary, then he couldn't win the general election, and he would never get the health care bill done. And in 120 days, he's got the first piece of the legislation done. It's made it through the House, and the media doesn't want to give him the credit that he so rightly deserves to get this done. Of course it's not fair. Why
does the media not want to give him the credit?
Well, because they're a bunch of liberal individuals who wanted to see Hillary Clinton win. And what we saw was an analysis by Fox that came out that said 89% of the media coverage in the president's first 100 days was negative. They looked at ABC, NBC, CBS from January 20th to April 9th, 1,900 minutes of coverage. Of that, 89% of that was negative, which means 11% was either neutral or positive. And you go back and look at what Barack Obama's coverage was, and I look at what Time Magazine, their analysis was after the first 100 days, grace under fire. I don't even know what that means, but that's how great they, treated Obama. And this president, they want to give him no credit for what he's accomplished.
What about, since this bill does face a rough road in the Senate, what about the media criticism that the president and the Republicans were sort of spiking the football on the 50-yard line with that Rose Garden ceremony?
Look, why don't we give him the opportunity to get the bill through the Senate? Now it's in Mitch McConnell's hands. They're going to work on the bill. It was just 3 or 4 weeks ago where they said the bill was dead and he couldn't get it through the House. And once again, he's proved them wrong. So, I think the president has the opportunity to say, look, once again, the media has a false narrative against him. He has gotten the legislation done on the House side. It's now going to the Senate side. He's the greatest negotiator our country's ever seen. He's going to get this bill done. It's going to get between the two houses. And it's going to come to a signature, and he's going to get it done.
Since you say that the president accusing the media of a false narrative, and not for the first time, all of these tweets where he talks about fake news, sometimes he doesn't even describe what specific story he's objecting to. Do you think it loses its punch if the president is saying this over and over again as opposed to reserving it for, truly outrageous coverage that is unfair?
No, I don't think so, Howard, because the coverage is unfair in totality. And if you look at it, and if you look at what the Media Research Center said immediately following the election, that 97% of the respondents who they surveyed said they didn't let the media's bias change their opinion on who they voted for. Yeah. Go back and look at what Fox saw right now was 98% of the people who voted for Trump are standing by him and would vote for him again because the media has been so biased against this president in the first 120 days that it is fake coverage, and he has to call them out. He has a platform that the mainstream media hates, which is social media going directly to the American people. That's how he communicates the best.
All right. Just want to mention the Media Research Center is a conservative group. Now, this week you left the firm, the Washington firm that you co-founded after the election, Avenue Strategies, and there were reports that some foreign clients were being solicited with promises or dangling the possibility of access to President Trump, presumably through you. What's behind your decision?
Yeah, Howie, you're exactly right. There were reports that said that there were international companies soliciting firms and promising meetings, of which I knew nothing about. I'd never spoken to these individuals. I had no relationship with them. And anybody who's making promises on my behalf is candidly not telling the truth, and I couldn't be associated with that, so I stepped away. The great news is the economy's banging. Trump is creating jobs. I'll find a new job very quickly.
Were you worried at all, given your prominence and particularly your role in the campaign, that the stories about the firm that you were previously associated with were becoming a distraction for the White House?
Well, not so much a distraction for the White House, but let me be clear. Anybody who's going to potentially use my name, my likeness, or my image without my knowledge, I just can't be part of. And so, look, my agenda, and I've been very clear about this, is to help companies create jobs, help the White House any way I can from the outside, move their agenda forward. And if I can do that, I'll be happy to.
There are a whole bunch of stories continuing about infighting within the White House fueled by leaks that presumably are coming from, actually many of the stories say, senior White House officials, sometimes outside advisors. We saw this with Steve Bannon and there were all these stories about how he was losing influence, and meanwhile he's still there and apparently has the same amount of influence. But New York Times piece the other day on Reince Priebus, the chief of staff, the day after the win in the House on health care, described this as the vote as less of a reprieve, less of a victory than a reprieve for Priebus, saying he's a would-be gatekeeper desperately in search of a gate. Do these sorts of leaks hurt the president? Because it does seem like it's a pretty leaky White House.
No, of course leaks hurt the president, and there's always been leaks and there will always be leaks. But I think what would be a nice thing to give Reince Priebus the credit he deserves for getting this piece of legislation done on the House side. I know for a fact that Reince was up there, he was making phone calls, he was talking to members, he is on the president's agenda, he's moving the president's agenda forward, and any of these internal leaks. And what I've said 100 times, and I'll repeat it here. Anybody who is not on the president's agenda should not be working for the administration. They should not be working for the government, because there is one person's agenda that has to move forward. That's the president's. If you don't want to support his agenda and you're the person who answers the phones or you're the chief of staff, you shouldn't be in the government. And what we saw was Reince Priebus on the president's agenda, getting this health care bill done through Congress, at least on the House side for now.
Well, there's my headline. Corey to leakers, get out. And just the surprising thing was, this was a pretty big victory for the White House and for Reince Priebus in particular, who took the lead on it. Usually you get that kind of story when you've done something bad or you're about to resign. Anyway, great to see you, Corey Lewandowski. Thanks very much for joining us from New Hampshire.